Part 1. The Deal on the Cursed Land. It was 2 o'clock in the morning, but Yusef couldn't sleep. Not because of nightmares this time, but because of the trucks loading the last pieces of his old furniture. He had sold everything. Everything but the house. The Zawahiri family home was not just an old building, it was a massive, ancient stone structure standing on a secluded hill, surrounded by a dense pine forest where the sun rarely penetrated. His great-grandfather built it in the 19th century, allegedly on ground where the remains of an ancient sorceress were buried. Everyone who had lived in the house or even tried to sell it met a tragic end. Yusef, the last heir, was driven by desperation after losing his fortune. He couldn't find a buyer, but he found a strange tenant, a man named Dr. Azam, a specialist in the paranormal, who claimed he wanted to use the house for research purposes. Dr. Azam's terms were bizarre. A 1-year lease paid in advance with an exorbitant sum that far exceeded the house's value in exchange for one terrifying condition. Yusef, or any member of his family, was strictly forbidden from approaching the house or attempting to contact him for the entire duration of the contract. If he broke the condition, he would lose the entire amount. The deal was too good to the point of being alarming. Nevertheless, Yusef, trembling, signed the papers. When he asked Azam about the reason for the harsh condition, the doctor smiled coldly and said in a low voice, like a whisper from the grave, "This house does not like anyone to leave its grasp, and the shadows your family has collected must remain where they are." On the night Yusef left, he looked back at the house. Every window looked like a deep black eye, and in one of them he glimpsed a tall, thin silhouette, standing motionless, unlike any human shadow. Part 2. The Notebook and the Muffled Cries. 6 months passed peacefully. Yusef started a new life far away, using the money to establish a small business. But the calm was short-lived. One day he received an old wooden box by mail. The sender was unknown. The box looked hauntingly familiar. It was the toolbox his father had left in the storage room of the house. Inside, Yusef didn't find tools. He found a thick, black leather-bound notebook. It wasn't his father's. It was Dr. Azam's. Yusef began flipping through the pages. They were filled with shaky handwriting, hand-drawn maps of the house's rooms, strange symbols, and dates. The notes were disturbingly detailed. Day 34. The foul stench from the basement is increasing. It's a mixture of rotting metal and withered roses. I recorded a whisper at midnight, a woman's voice calling a certain name. Day 68. Thermal measurements are illogical. One corner in the living room remains at 0 degrees Celsius, regardless of the furnace. When I turn on the lamp, the shadow in that corner shrinks. It doesn't disappear. It's alive. Day 99. I started hearing children. Faint laughter comes from the long corridor, but when I open the door, I find small, mud-covered footprints leading to the wall. The children are not dead. They are trapped between the walls. Then the notes became less coherent and more insane. The drawings turned into distorted faces and trees oozing blood. The error day 175. I saw her eyes in the antique mirror. It's not the sorceress, it's my great-grandfather's wife. She was crying blood and repeating, "Where is my key? You must release him before the consumption is complete." Day 182. I realized the house isn't haunted by a ghost. The house itself is the hunger, and it uses the shadows as threads to pull people in. It took my little finger last night as a down payment for release. It was speaking through the extended shadow on the ceiling. The last page was just Arabic calligraphy written in thick red. It looked like blood, with large, terrifying words. Part 3. Running to the inside, Yusef felt a cold shiver run through his bones. Day 183. The contract he signed was for 1 year, 365 days. More than half the term was left, yet Dr. Azam had sent the notebook. Yusef suddenly felt both responsibility and fear. He had to go there. That night, he drove his car back into the forest. He reached the dirt road leading to the house. The tires groaned on the gravel. When the house appeared between the trees, it was not the house he had left. It was darker, as if the cement had absorbed all the light around it. The entrance was partially open. Yusef advanced cautiously. A deadly silence enveloped the place. No wind, no insects, no sounds. Inside the house, the atmosphere was worse. The smell of rotten roses was overwhelming. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dark dust. But Yusef noticed something horrific. There were no shadows. In the beam of his flashlight, objects looked flat and dead, as if all the shadows had been collected in one place. Yusef reached the living room. There he was, in the middle of the room, on his father's old prayer rug, Dr. Azam. He was not dead. He was pinned. His 4 limbs and the top of his head were nailed to the floor with thick, long spikes. His body was contorted in an unnatural way. His eyes were wide open, filled with absolute terror, and he was trying to speak, but his mouth was stitched shut with thick black thread. In his trembling hand, he was holding something. It was an old brass key. As soon as Yusef approached, Azam began to shake violently, his eyes frantically pointing toward the antique mirror above the fireplace. In that moment, Yusef heard the whisper. It wasn't coming from one room. It was coming from the walls, from the floor, from the air itself. He's returned. He's returned with the key. The Zawahiri family. Suddenly, there was no more whispering. There was one single, synchronized scream from every corner of the room. Part 4. What lurks in the mirror? Yusef darted towards the mirror, ignoring Azam's intensifying moans. The mirror was massive, with an antique wooden frame carved like intertwined snakes. When he shined his light on it, he didn't see his reflection. He saw another scene. He saw himself, but it wasn't him. It was his great-grandfather in the same clothes, but he was running down the dark corridor, holding the same key. He was running from his wife, who wasn't crying blood, as Azam had said, but was cackling a sinister laugh, her arms unnaturally elongated, her shadow moving extremely fast as if chasing him. In the vision, the great-grandfather stopped in front of a bare wall, dug into the wall, threw the key into the opening, and quickly covered the opening with plaster. The scene ended, and Yusef's reflection returned. But Yusef was not alone in the reflection. She was standing behind him, the Zawahiri woman. But she did not look human. She was wearing an old worn-out dress, but she was entirely composed of shadow. She had no clear features, just a feminine shape made of dense blackness, and only her eyes glowed with a terrifying red, like embers. He took my child from me, and now I will take your soul, Yusef. Her voice came from behind his shoulder, a harsh, fractured sound like shattering glass. Yusef turned to face her, but she had vanished from her spot. In that instant, he felt a sharp pain in his back. The shadows that had been absent in the room suddenly began to emerge from every piece of furniture, from the ceiling corners and from the floor crevices. The shadows began to gather and intertwine, forming the shape of a colossal dark hand. The hand pressed on his chest, pushing him towards Azam. Azam let out a desperate, muffled cry. Yusef saw blood flowing from the mouths of the spikes, holding Azam down. Now Yusef knew the secret. The house fed on pain and despair, and Dr. Azam was the meal being served. The more fear Yusef felt, the stronger the shadows became. Yusef remembered what Azam wrote. The house is hunger. The key is important. The shadows now began to coalesce around Yusef. He felt himself being sucked into the darkness. He recalled the legends. These shadows were the souls of everyone who had died in the house. collected by the house to fuel its power. In a moment of desperation, Yusef held the brass key up toward the moving shadow of the woman. "You don't want me, you want the key," Yusef screamed, barely audible. The shadow paused for a second. Her two red eyes glowed. "Where?" "The vault," the shadow woman whispered. "No, not for me," Yusef shouted. "It's for your child." Part 5. The Release. His great-grandfather hadn't been running from his wife's ghost. He was running from a curse that wanted to use its child. He had hidden the key so that his wife's spirit couldn't find it, and so the curse couldn't be completed. Yusef gripped the key and ran back to the corridor he had seen in the mirror. He rushed toward the plastered wall. He knew the great-grandfather had hidden the key there. Yusef began punching the plaster with his bare hand until blood was drawn. There was no time to search for a tool. Behind him, he heard a breaking sound. The colossal shadow hand had broken free and was pursuing him, smashing everything in its path. "Give it to me, it's feeding time," the shadow woman roared. In the nick of time, the plaster broke. Yusef fell to his knees and saw the opening. It was empty. There was no other key. The key in his hand was the only key that would allow the child to escape. Yusef saw his blood-stained hand touch the opening. In that moment, he felt an intense cold. Something grabbed his hand from the inside. The shadow began to scream. It wasn't a scream of anger. It was a scream of pain. "You cannot. The curse. I will make the house eat you." Yusef reached further and further, and in that opening he realized what he had to do. In the living room, Dr. Azaim was screaming, and the spikes were slowly pulling out of his body due to the house's movement. In the corridor, Yusef pressed the brass key firmly against the opening. Suddenly, the key transformed into a blinding white light, and at the same moment, a small child's shadow emerged from the opening. But it was glowing and radiant, not dark like the house's shadows. As soon as the child shadow emerged, it darted toward the woman's shadow and embraced her. The shadow woman's screaming stopped. Everything stopped. The shadows ceased moving. The shadow woman began to fade, her red eyes turning to a pure, bright white. In the last moment before she completely vanished, she whispered one last time, "Thank you, Zawahiri." The child and the shadow woman disappeared. The shadows returned to their natural places. Yusef's reflection returned in the mirror. A natural silence reigned, the calm after the storm. Epilogue. Yusef rushed back to the living room. Dr. Azam was still pinned but had passed out. Yusef quickly removed the spikes and helped him out of the house. In the morning, with the first ray of sunlight, the house still stood, but this time its windows reflected the light. They were no longer black eyes. Yusef and Azaim never spoke about what happened. Azaim knew the curse was broken, and the house, though not happy, had stopped its hunger. A month later, Yusef returned to the house to sell it. There were natural shadows in the rooms, but under the bed in his great-grandfather's room, he found an old piece of paper. It was a message in his great-grandfather's handwriting. "Yusef, I did not kill my wife. I helped her spirit so that the curse could not take our